Hey, thank you all so much for joining another episode of Celeste the Therapist podcast. My name is Celeste, the therapist from Boston. If you've never been here before, thank you for giving me a try. I really appreciate you. On this podcast, I get to talk to amazing people that are doing things to empower other people. But once a month, Jermaine Morris and we get to talk about ways to get your mind right. And I'm going to have him introduce himself to you all.
Hi, I'm Jermaine Morris. I'm a certified coaching consultant with a practice based around a DISC assessment, which is basically a test that shows how we prefer to operate in the world, how we solve problems, interact with people, the pace we like to work at, and like procedures and protocols we follow. The report that comes with the test highlights our communication styles. It's the most effective way, least effective way to communicate with us, a potential blind spots in our behavior, as well as our strengths and best environments for us to thrive in.
Nice. And the DISC assessment is something that you can find by going to mykeysto.me.com,
Yes.
your website, where you can book a consultation. It's something that I've done. I remember I seen a therapist on social media talking about, when you have a great relationship with yourself, and understand yourself, the relationships with other people start to look different. Like it's important to understand yourself. And I know a lot of times we don't understand ourselves because we've done so much assimilating with the environment. And I realize, like, when I work with people, I don't even think people understand they've assimilated with the environment, which is crazy.
Yeah, and I'm about self-awareness without judgment.
Yeah.
And so everything I do is I work under the premise of just figuring out who we are, how we are, and then not associating right, wrong, good, or bad. But let's just get a clear look and understanding of how we are and how we operate. And then it does show and highlight how we interact with other people, our boundaries, if we set them or haven't, how we allow ourselves to be communicated with, how we communicate with other people, all that sort of stuff.
And I just want to say too, even though like I believe that understanding yourself can allow you to have better relationships with people, it's a grieving time frame to go through when you realize some of the people that you are around really don't get your best interests or are using you, and when people have this like aha moment, I'll say to them, just remember, like, it's not that they've changed, you've just changed, and you get to see the light. And so, because it could be a really hard moment to realize, like, you're the party friend, or you're not when you're struggling friend, or you're the friend that will say yes, or and I know, like, that's a really hard, like, check for people to come to terms with.
Yeah, it's very eye-opening. Some relationships don't make it on the other side.
Right.
Some of the dynamics change, but all that is for, I think, what's necessary. I think when when you reach the point to where you're like, my life is not looking like how I want it to, I need to make some changes. Then some changes happen.
Yeah, that's good. And speaking of changes, one of the things that prevent people from being able to get to where they could get to, and different, we could talk about any area of their lives, right? There's financially, there's professionally, there's socially, there's just so many goals that I recognize people have, or ideas about the future. A big piece of the struggle, I think, is our own limiting beliefs. And that's something that you said you've like kind of seen, you've seen lately, a wave of that. And I see it a lot. A lot of times I tell people, if negative thoughts were a person, I would have a hit out on me, because I do a really good job at like helping people like work on their perspective, shift their thought process, by helping them see that they're limiting themselves from getting to a certain point. It's sometimes it is society or situations, but a lot of times it's our thoughts. What are your thoughts about people and their limiting beliefs? Like, how do you think that starts for people?
Home. Is that how it starts? Normally we are attached to some belief about ourselves, where we are in the world, where we are in our family dynamic, where we are in our community. Like we associate some idea of our importance or our position. So we have some adults who grew up as kids. They were the ones that were always responsible to look out for their siblings. So they've grown up their entire life. They're the mom or the dad of the friend group. They're the quote unquote responsible one in their, at their job, or, like they took on a role, and that's who they've become as adults. Or or to the opposite, maybe they weren't told what they could do. They were maybe talked down to. So they believe that they're less capable than they are, because someone's always told them that they were. So they don't believe that they can do things. They don't believe that they're capable, because they believe what somebody else told them. But in any event, you get to the point to where you're an adult, and it's not the world that's stopping you. There's no individual that's in front of you. It's literally just what we believe about ourselves is what creates the ceiling for the stuff that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and there's the explicit, like, you can't do this or you'll never be nothing, and then there's the just kind of watching others not do much, right? Because in some households, it wasn't about being told you weren't going to be nothing, or what, there weren't like negative statements made, but you didn't see people succeed in certain areas, and so you don't realize how much environment has played a role in your psyche about what you believe for yourself. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah, it could be something simple as girls don't do that.
Yeah.
Boys don't do that. Nobody of your ethnicity or religion does that. That no one that comes from where we come from goes on to do those things. Have a plan B. Be realistic. All these sorts of narratives and things that we're taught, and a lot of times I'll say they're probably taught with good intentions, but they become very limiting in the belief of, you understand, when we're children, we believe that we can slay dragons and ride magic carpets and fly, leap tall buildings at a single bound. And then you're told, no, you can't. You're then told you need to be realistic. You're then told, to start compressing and limiting and lowering your expectations of what it is that you can accomplish in this life. And some of us, we adapt that in varying degrees. So some of us no longer believe that we think we can put on a cape and fly, but we become pilots. You know what I mean? And so, okay, I understand I can't tie this, towel around my neck and fly through the air, but I'm gonna fly through the air, and they go on to become a pilot. Other people are taught you can't be this, and so, and no disrespect to the professions, you then become a janitor, or you become something that you didn't want to be, because it was a job that was hiring, that somebody told you it was realistic, that this is what you quote unquote should be doing. And so we get these ideas that who we were and the trajectory we were on gets stripped away by beliefs and by narratives and by thoughts. And then by the time that we're adults, that ceiling has just become so much lower. We constantly tell ourselves what we can't do. We paint ourselves in the corners on narratives and say what we shouldn't do. And then we just find ourselves living a life that's not fulfilling.
Yeah, I feel like there's this burning desire in us. You talked about like kids, and I think about even babies, and the willpower to walk is because everybody around you is walking. So regardless of how many times they fall, they still get up. But before all the narratives and things are said, that it shows the strength that we have right before, like we're like a blank slate. And then the narratives start coming, and sometimes it's us internalizing it because we're not being talked to, and it's by no fault. It's not anyone's fault, right? I'm not looking at it as a fault thing, but just sometimes our parents may not have known like how to ask certain questions or what we're dealing with, and so we sometimes have created our own narrative to survive the situations. And I tell people, as we become older, sometimes those narratives no longer help us in the same way. They tend to harm us because it prevents us from really like propelling in a way that we know. And I think that some people that get uncomfortable or struggle with some anxiety, a lot of it is because they're not living a life that they know they can live deep down inside, and they're kind of settling for less than.
Yeah. And I think a lot of parents, with the best of intentions, because I think that's
Yes.
important to address. I don't think that
Yes.
it's these malicious or angry parents,
Mm.
but there's a lot of them that the motivation that's kind of ingrained in children is through fear, guilt, and shame.
Mm-hmm.
And so that becomes the motivation of make sure you get good grades so you don't end up on the street.
Right. Yeah.
Make sure you do well in school so you're not a blemish on the family.
Right.
Make sure you do these, like, and so fear, guilt, and shame is the motivation that is to keep kids on the straight and narrow. Like the intention is if I implement, and we probably don't even do it consciously. That just tends to be the outcome. And so when fear, guilt, and shame is the motivation, and children fall in line, if they don't reach a point when they get older to reevaluate the motivation while they're doing things, fear, guilt, and shame becomes the same motivator for their decisions as adults.
Good point. Yeah.
And so I'm afraid of disappointing people. I'm afraid of being rejected. I'm fearful of making a mistake. I'm afraid of not being perfect. I'm afraid that if I don't do this, or if I take this profession and they don't approve, that if I do this and they don't like and then the fear, guilt, and shame is the same motivator as adults. And that becomes a very limiting space to operate from.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And when Jermaine talks about like the way parents operate from fear, guilt, and shame, is kind of like they want you to do well, so well sometimes that they're not really listening to what you want, because they feel like they know what's best for you, which is where your limiting belief starts to probably kick in sometimes, trying to do things to their standards. And especially there's a lot of adults that are struggling in this area of this battle of trying to live the life that they want to live versus the life that their parents want them to live. And you're right, a lot of it is off of emotion. And so when Jermaine brings up fear, guilt, and shame, anybody who knows me knows I believe emotions are powerful, and there's something that we all have, but it's not they're not language that we are identifying with. We're not talking about that emotion. And unfortunately, whether we're talking about this situation or any situation, when you can't identify the emotion unfortunately tends to control your narrative and your choices. And so like there's all those emotions he just named, fear, guilt, and shame. All three of those I've had. And I recognize and I like work through them as opposed to allowing them to stop me. Anytime I speak, anytime I'm trying something new, the fear like kicks in 120%. So it's not about like you can't get around it, but it's about how do I lean into it and how do I challenge it, right? And so if we're able to challenge those emotions, especially if we recognize that they probably have been passed on from generation to generation, and we recognize that, it's so important for us to like talk about it within ourselves.
Yeah. And most of those are, like I said, and it's important to reiterate that it is oftentimes done out of the best of intentions.
Absolutely.
That I'm passing these things to you to keep you out of trouble, or to motivate you to be the best version you can be. And there's a lot of success stories that come from rooted out of fear, guilt, and shame. People who go to be very successful in the world in that respective field, but maybe their happiness level may be
different.
Yeah. And so for somebody who's dealing with that, because I think it's also important to identify, not only if you identify it, but then what do you do about it?
Yeah.
Those steps of reflection, of kind of, as adults, we have to kind of revisit all our belief systems. So all the things that the narratives we tell ourselves, at some point there needs to be, an ongoing kind of check-in. So reflection of what are these beliefs that I have? Self-awareness, to be knowledgeable in the moment, like either I'm doing it now or I just did that. Like I just told myself something. I just told myself no, even though I never asked the question to the world. I'm just telling myself no, I'm limiting myself. And then reframing. So going from reflection to self-awareness to reframing, to changing the way that I see myself in my abilities and what it is I can do from what I can accomplish.
Mm-hmm. That's important. When you talk about these steps, because they sound nice and pretty. I remember last year, and for people that are new here, there's a ton of episodes with Jermaine and I. You can find if you go to CelesteTheTherapist.com/podcast, it'll take you to all of the episodes. But there's an episode you talked about, like when like, let's say you gave an example of like having all of these layers on and then you take the layers off. And I think about the awareness of the limiting beliefs, or the awareness, and like it's not a simple transition to like, oh, I'm limiting myself, let me like unlimit myself. I wish it was like that simple. Like logically we can like say it out loud, but like emotionally and like realistically it's not as simple.
Yeah. So I've always said when it comes to making changes that the process itself is like stepping over a puddle, but the emotional and mental feeling is like jumping the Grand Canyon. So the actual steps of the reflection, of the self-awareness and the reframing, they're simple steps, like quote unquote simple steps. But what that actually does when we actually start to put those into application, it's a lot, because we're rewiring the way we see ourselves in the world. And so something that's important to keep in mind when we start talking about limiting beliefs, it's not rooted in what we're actually capable of. It's rooted in our belief of what we're capable of. So always with a sidebar. So most of us are familiar with the five senses. That's your sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. So there's the sixth sense. And so for anybody who's out there, because I know it's visual for some, audio for others, it's the example of if you close your eyes. Well, we do this with you, Celeste. So if you close your eyes and take your index finger on your right hand, like your right index finger. Perfect. And with your eyes closed, touch the tip of your nose. Perfect. Now with the index, you take it away, and your index finger on your left hand. Same thing. Touch the tip of your nose with your eyes closed. Cool. So how are you able to do that? You can open your eyes now.
Oh, because I know where my nose is.
Yeah, but you can't see it. So you can't see where your finger is nor where your nose is, but you know how to do it with your eyes closed.
Oh, okay.
So that's the sixth sense that we have. That's the body's ability to perceive and be aware of where it is in relation to itself.
Okay.
So it makes sense. So
yeah.
Oh my God, what is it? Proprioception, I believe. Oh, please don't, doctor me favorite. Proprioception.
I don't know. I never heard of it. You telling me something new?
Yeah. Proprioception. And so what that is that's the sixth sense, the body's awareness of itself. So that's how you know, like you can touch anybody who's doing it. You can take your right hand and touch your left knee without being able to see it. You can grab your right foot without looking at it. Your body is aware of its position to itself. So there's a mental and emotional version of that in our perception to the world. So, but the difference is that where you can tell where you are in relation to your body knows where it is. The perception we have when it pertains to where we are in the world, it's a belief of where we are. So there are some of us who have a belief that's inaccurate, and we're using that belief to gauge where we are in the world. So it would be the equivalent of if I said now take your right hand and touch your left ear, you'd be touching the back of your head. You know, take your left index finger and touch your nose, you'd be touching your neck. It's not accurate.
Yeah.
So there needs to be a recalibration.
Yeah.
And that's what happens when we remove the limiting beliefs.
That's really good. I think about, I'm a big, I believe in accountability. I don't look at social media as a thing that creates anything in anybody. I think it's what we allow. That's just my personal opinion. But I think about social media, and I think sometimes, like when we talk about where people are in life and where they're not, I think sometimes people environment includes their social media feed. And sometimes people allow that, like what they see somebody achieve, like the achievement, not the process, to limit them and believing like I can't get there. And I think about the recalibration. A lot of times people go through and start letting some accounts go because they recognize like it's creating some like something inside of them that makes them like feel like they can't get further. That's kind of like an example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's almost if you were to use a target or a sight or something or anything that it's like look into a microscope. You keep turning it until it lines up. Well, you can't. Your sight is off because the awareness part is off. The limiting beliefs have changed where your sight is. So you have to recalibrate. That's the reframing. It's the reason why I can't hit this target is because my sight is off. It's not my ability. It's not it's not if the gun works. It's not if the bullet works. It's the fact that the sight is off. These limiting beliefs have changed my perception of what I'm looking at and where I'm standing.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm never hitting the target, regardless of how hard I try. It's not an effort issue. So for some people who are finding themselves stuck or finding themselves in positions that are not advantageous to the life they want to live, it's okay. I need to recalibrate this sight. Where am I basing my ability off of? What what is the gauge I'm using to say what I can and cannot do? You know, where does that test that shows what I'm actually capable of?
Yeah.
Because somebody told me in the 3rd grade that women can't be surgeons.
Yep.
You're 32 now. Like, but there's been all these women surgeons. Like, what is the? But men don't become nurses. Well, there's all these male nurses. Like, what are these? Like, what are these beliefs? I want to go to college. None of our family went to college.
Right.
I want to go to therapy. None of us go to therapy. Well, no, that's y'all. That has nothing to do with me. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, don't be sorry. And you'll be surprised for people listening. Sometimes like people have grown up in a great environment. It could be something that was said to you. It could be something you've watched. You'll be surprised at how much our mind is susceptible to whatever we are feeding it. The same way when we eat junk and we feel like crap, right? Or if we eat like a healthy meal and we feel like we could conquer the world, the same thing that happens with our mind believes what we tell it. And even though like some of the things you may have heard, it wasn't like you was feeding it, but you got exposed to that statement. That's why like taking inventory daily is important, because you don't recognize how much you are being controlled by your thoughts. And your thoughts, unfortunately, sometimes we allow it to have a mind of its own and don't entertain it. We don't like engage with what's going on. And that unfortunately harms you from like really living life. When Jermaine talked about people excelling professionally, and I always for people watching, I have my hands together and one is going to go up. I say professionally people are doing this, but emotionally it's not in line. It's not in alignment. And I don't want that life. Like nobody would consciously say like, yeah, I want to make $1 million, but I don't want to be happy. Nobody would ever say that, because unfortunately we've equated our tangibles to like internal like happiness, when that's not how it works. And I think that it's so important to like check in with yourself about what's being said. Even me as an entrepreneur and people that I talked to that weren't, and it was like, why would you do that? You have a job, you have benefits, right? And so I thought the same thing. I'm like, dang, they right. You know, it was a whole battle for me to think about even branching out, because I had a job and benefits. And I wouldn't be here doing what I'm doing today if I allowed that limiting belief to stop me. But it wasn't just like, oh, that's a limiting belief, but it was a lot of me like continuing to like push forward, be consistent in the direction I was trying to go, and recognizing that those words affected my like ability or my mental status around what I had all this joy, and then it was like, it just went down. It's like, oh shoot, like what if, but that doesn't have to be the end of my story just because the statement was made. But I recognize like how it was harmful to my psyche with the direction I was going. And I just stopped talking to those people about it.
Yeah. And all the people who said keep your job because it's a job and it's got benefits had the best intentions.
Absolutely. I agree 100%.
You know what I mean? Like they're all like, you don't want that's a guaranteed check. You know exactly how much you're gonna make, got
the
vision,
fear.
dental.
Yep.
And the fear, guilt, and shame, those motivations. So breaking those down, because for some people like, well, I don't ever scare anybody in the fear can be of the scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
Fear can be okay, you can make $50,000 a year, just arbitrary number, at this job. You can bank
Yep.
on $50,000 a year. If you go out on a business for yourself, there's no guarantee how much you'll make.
Mm-hmm.
You can make
Mm-hmm.
100,000 a year. You can make 10,000 a year. So the
Mm-hmm.
fear mindset would be go with what's safe. So I'm going to use fear as the motivation for you to stick with what's quote unquote guaranteed.
Yeah.
And so they're not trying to talk us out of the goal or the dream, not like negatively. They're just like, no, I want you to be safe. I want you to be careful.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to I mean, you really want it, but
Yeah.
you can, you know, I mean, I know you like him, but he comes from a good family and he got a good job,
Right.
you want like, and so fear will be part of why people, try to motivate us to do stuff. Uh,
Absolutely.
guilt is a little more intentional, but can still be with the best of intentions.
True.
And so we can, you want to go to school out of state. You want to move a couple thousand miles away for what's best for what you're trying to do. But you going to leave me here? You're going to leave the family? You're not going to be around for this? And they want you around the family because they love you and they want you near, but they will guilt you out of opportunities and
Yeah.
guilt you into thinking smaller and staying at the school locally, or not leaving your hometown, or not doing something, or shame blatantly, you're not doing what I want you to do. So I'm going to put this on you to
I
hopefully
know.
keep you doing what I want you to do. And what we want to do can be belittled, and what we want can do, and it can still be with good intention. The reason why I'm trying to belittle your dream is because I want you to do this, which I believe will keep you safe. I
Yeah.
want you to do this because I think this is what's best for you. And
Yeah.
so fear, guilt, and shame can show up in a lot of different ways, but they definitely lead to a bunch of limiting beliefs, which really alter, how we feel about ourselves and our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love how you pointed out the person who talked about like not you sure you want to leave your job, because sometimes it's not about people being haters. People say, oh, I got all these haters. It's not about a hater. It's more about like protection and overprotection, and people want the best for you. But my life and Jermaine's life are two different lives, right?
Yeah.
We don't have the same path. And so I tell people, if you have a ear infection and you keep going to the heart doctor and he keeps talking about your heart, you're confused. It's because he's a heart doctor. And so people are only operating sometimes from the knowledge of what they know to be true for themselves.
Yeah.
Like when people meet with me and Jermaine, like we don't come with that perspective when we're meeting with clients. We're looking at them holistically, but that's kind of like the job that we have. But when it's personal, like when it's family or friends, they sometimes it's hard to have that perspective when they're like operating from love only, and not really able to like take a step back from their story. They're looking at it differently.
Yeah. And for people who are dealing with that, so we talk about like the steps of reframing it. So if you realize that, no, I do have these limiting beliefs, I realize that it's been holding me back in particular areas. And then you're in the point of self-awareness where you're like, okay, I'm doing it right now. Like, or I did that this morning. Like I'm realizing I had an opportunity and I let some voice in the back of my head talk me out of it. Okay, I'm realizing when I'm doing it. The reframing part is going to have to be intentional.
Yeah.
So we've had X amount of years on this planet with a particular narrative. And so to go against that it's going to require a lot of intentionality. And I always start base point when it comes to reframing, kind of, we talked about them for a couple of shows, are affirmations. So identifying which of those of the motivators are what is the limiting belief I have. I'm worried that I'm gonna let people down. Like if that's the motivator that's keeping you out of position, like I don't want to disappoint anybody. Affirmations of I can change my mind. Like I can make decisions for myself.
Yeah.
Their feelings are not my responsibility.
Yeah, that's a huge one. Yeah.
My value is not in being perfect. like affirmations of saying like, these are things that I will replay to myself, you know, write them down, speak them out loud, do all the different steps of working them in, of like, I can have my own life. I can make my own decisions. And if they're not okay with them, that's still okay.
That's okay. Yeah.
It's okay. And even if I'm rejected, it's still okay. Like I can make a decision of saying that it's all right for me to have my own life. And that's going to go fundamentally against the wiring. So starting with affirmations are a good tool to start, and then the application of the affirmation.
Yeah.
So if it's something like I'm allowed to say no is an affirmation, then during the course of the day, look for opportunities to say no where you normally would have caved. And then journal the situation and the outcome.
Yeah.
So you can give yourself, you know, history and data to go along with the changes. Like these are just some practical kind of, you know, like, how do I do so? What's something I can do right now? So the implement, adding in affirmations, applying the affirmations, and then documentation of the application of the affirmations.
I love that.
Those are some good tools to start with.
I love that because it helps you like celebrate the moments. I think when we can like identify, I mean, like, you know, when you're working with the therapist, and I know everybody doesn't have that like opportunity to do that, or a coach, you know, you're able to like have somebody else remind you. And so like, you know, the whole purpose of me starting this podcast is because I recognize like the barriers to people like receiving help. And I really wanted people to just like be able to get like nuggets, and being able to celebrate the moments is cool, is really amazing. Being able to reframe. But also I wanted to say that when you are contemplating on like saying no, for example, let's just use that example. The idea to say no may create a lot of anxiety for you, right? But I want to let people know saying yes also has that anxiety. Not only does it have that anxiety, but the resentment or the I'm tired or I don't get my stuff done happens. So there's like a little bit more negative outcome to you not choosing what you need for yourself. A lot of times we like negate ourselves and we think more about the other person. And a lot of times it's because when you say yes in that moment, you don't feel that anxiety as hard as you feel it when you say no. So you just be like, I'm gonna say yes. So I do want to say, like, giving yourself what you need by saying no, and I'm just using this as an example because you brought it up. Giving yourself what you need when you say no and choose you will be hard. And but I it's hard because your system is not used to you choosing you. But I promise you, the more you begin to fall in line and create that environment for your system and your mind, it's like, oh, okay, this is what we're doing. We get to choose us first, right? That's the greatest thing about humans, is that we can reframe, recalibrate, right? We have that ability, but so many of us have never been taught how to do it, or never have been shown the way, or seen it happen. But regardless of what has been your story, it doesn't have to continue being your story. Like, you have the opportunity to change the narrative.
Yeah, and the presumed outcome when you're going against the machine of fear, guilt, and shame, it as opposed to reality, is crazy. So, what was the story? So there's a little story about how they used to train elephants in the circus. Like once upon a time, I know it seems like it's left field. So when they used to get
it always comes around though.
Always bring it back to one. So when they had these baby elephants, they used to have these big, huge, like steel chains and collars around their necks. And so they used to, you know, fight and tug and pull, and they would use these to kind of keep them in line. Well, by the time that these elephants became full grown, you could lead an elephant almost with a shoelace. Like, they had really these tiny little, very, very thin, very, very rope, that if this elephant ever just halfway turned its head, it could pull free. But because they had spent their entire life groomed to that, this chain is stronger than they are. It got to the point to where when there was something around its neck, it just felt like that's what would hold them in place. So the baby elephant would fight against the chain, but the grown elephant could just be led, you know, doing handstands on stuff, because at that point it had kind of acquiesced to the system. We're very similar that way with those limiting beliefs. In the beginning, when somebody tells us what we can or can't do, there may be some resistance, but by the time we're adults, like, we've just succumbed to these ideas, even though we at any given time could break away from these narratives.
Change.
We just believe that this thing is stronger than we are. We believe we're not capable. We believe that we're not smart enough, or we're not fast enough, or strong enough, or consistent enough. We'll tell ourselves these things because that's the chain that held us when we were younger, but it's a jump rope that's holding us now. And so when it comes to breaking that narrative, keeping it in that mind. So when we make the decision of, okay, I want to start making decisions for myself, I want to start saying no, I want to start, the repercussions that we think will happen, it's in most cases, the relationship we have with those people who will get introduced to the new us, or the changes that we'll make in our life, it's not as consequential as a lot of us believe. It's just that there'll be a shift with them because it's not what they're accustomed to.
Right.
But then most people are not concerned with us like that.
No, they're really not.
You know, like, you start hearing phrases, we'll build a whole scenario in our head. It's going to be this kick down, drag out, fight, this. And then the response we get from them is, oh, it's your life.
Yep.
And they're done with it.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
we make it bigger in our head than what it really is, honestly.
Because when we're younger, it's the chain. It's being drilled into us a lot of times. It's constantly being told to us, no, if you do this, you'll be that. If you don't do this, you'll this. If you don't go to college, you'll be a bum on the street. If you don't do this, like, it's a chain. It's really being worked on us. But by the time we're adults, there's nobody even bringing this up anymore.
No, it's not. It's in our head.
The only person talking about it is us in our head.
Yeah.
It's just that thin rope.
And I will say, the thing that we're talking about, because our mind looks for evidence on what we're saying, we look for the smallest evidence that can confirm that. And we don't even realize that's what's happening. So it keeps getting reinforced by the way that we are engaging in things, or we're like, we could hear a whole sermon, and one piece of it we will find that relates to, because kind of like when you if you buy a new red Toyota, you start seeing all these red Toyotas. Nobody went out and brought a red. Everybody didn't go out and buy red Toyotas. It's just that you're seeing it all the time. Yeah, you're seeing it. So if your mind is constantly in a negative space, and, you know, to your point about I love the analogy with the elephant and the chain, and then they go down to the rope and they're in alignment, and it's essentially what happens with us. Because our mind doesn't have concept of time is the reason why that happens as well, right? Because you can be a whole adult and have choices, but have a hard time recognizing or engaging in those choices, because for so long your choices were made for you. You were told what you weren't going to do. And so I think what I have found when I'm working with people is educating them on that reality of, like, what happens, like, because sometimes we don't get it, like, what's wrong with me, why can't I do this, or why it's not that you can't, it's just that it's hard, it's a process, right? Because you have all these motivational people saying do this and do that, but they're not talking about the process and how hard that process and transition is. So you think something's wrong with you because you ain't in alignment, because you logically, you know where you're trying to go, but you're just struggling with that, like, transitional piece.
That's why so in our mind, we talked about this before too, is that very, very rare. There's very, very little new information we take in on a daily basis. Very, very little. Like, most of the stuff it's information that's on repeat, and it's accepting information that already validates a preconceived notion.
Yep.
So you believe something, you already believe it, and then you'll find a few things that happen during the course of the day that just confirms what it is we already believe. And so when it comes to making these shifts and to doing something different, I always kind of refer to it as handlebar logic. So as a kid, we lived on the street, and for whatever reason, every kid who started to learn to ride a bike hit our mailbox. Like, it didn't matter how many houses down the street they were. Every kid on the block who first started learning how to ride a bike straight into our mailbox. My father had, like, it was on a wooden post This thing had been knocked down so many times. He had to keep renailing the mailbox to the post.
Dang.
Everybody hit this mailbox. And what was funny is I didn't catch it until I was older. It got to the point to where whenever a kid started riding a bike, every parent told them, don't hit that mailbox. And it got to the point to where everybody fixated on our mailbox. And it didn't matter how many houses down the street you were so fixated on the mailbox that your handlebars aimed directly at it, and every kid crashed into it. And so I think of it as like handlebar logic. Whatever you're fixated on is the direction that you're going, even if it's something that you fundamentally say you don't want to do.
Yeah, no.
So these beliefs it's going to require going against the grain with information. That's why I said the affirmations and the application of affirmations and the documentation of the application of the affirmation, being very intentional about not just saying don't hit the mailbox, but go straight down the street.
Yeah.
We're not even mentioning the mailbox.
Yeah.
We're taking that out of the equation and the thought process. So it's not about combating these negative emotions or thoughts or combating these limiting beliefs. We're not even focused on the limiting beliefs. It's not that, oh no, I can't do this, or I will go against that. It's no, I can do anything. I can ride down the street. I can do figure eights in the street. I can pop wheelies. I'm not even mentioning the mailbox because that's where I'm going to go at this stage.
Right.
So instead of don't worry about fighting the narratives that you already believe, it's just about opening ourselves up to all the possible things that we can do and all the possible ways we can get there, and then reiterating that into our thought process and the direction we're trying to go.
I really love that. It's kind of like when people are in these bad relationships, and I'm not saying like leave this person like all their people are saying. I'm like, let's just start thinking about what do you need? How you want to take care of yourself? And I promise you, every time, the more and more they start leaning into themselves, that relationship start looking funky, and they, it literally works that way, but we gotta like really be intentional about like training our mind and creating an environment. Because I promise you, like I'll bet my life on it, society is not going to train you. And society wants you to depend on them, to spend your money, to feel like to be insecure so you can purchase, right? So don't wait for society to do it. So wake up and be intentional on creating a life that you want for yourself.
Yeah. And just start with, what do I want my life to look like? Like I said, don't worry about the mailbox. Don't worry about what you telling yourself you can't do or this and that. Just what I want to look like. Where do people do vision boards and stuff. Like, you want a house, you want a cabin, you want to live by the woods, you want to live by the water, you want to live by the beach, you want to be a significant other, you're trying to be for the streets. Like, what do you want your life to look like? No judgment. Like, what do you want your life to look like? And to start doing the things that you want, attracting the energy you want, focusing on the life you want, not worrying about all things you don't want or what you feel like you can't do or all the limits that you believe that are not accessible to you. Putting your energy towards what you do want. And then the brain's going to start looking for the opportunities for what you do want.
Exactly. That's exactly how it works.
Yeah.
Red Toyota, mailbox. Y'all got a lot of analogies from Jermaine today. Jermaine was digging deep today. I ain't heard this many analogies in one show. This was good. I love it. It's always good. The topics. Jermaine comes up with the topic, and right before we talk, he tells me what he wants to talk about, and I say okay, and he leads the show. So it's always great. Tell people about how they can reach you if they want to work with you, because Jermaine does work with clients as well.
Yeah. So the easiest, first off, is the website. Go to mykeystome.com. mykeystome.com. My Keys to Me. And that website takes you, and it talks about what the assessment is, that the test we talked about earlier, kind of a breakdown on what it is in detail, as well as the coaching programs, how to get started. You can schedule a free 15-minute consultation so we can really answer any questions and then get you started. And then every social media platform is at J Morris CEO.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time always.
Always my favorite person in mental health.
Thank you. That makes me excited. That means you'll come back next month.